And it really wasn't censorship, it was a very easy change to make. So I'm going to read just 10 minutes or so from my Ántonia, which, you know, when you try to trace why this book is banned, basically all the research online is about why is this book banned? In fact, there's no answer. It's just like people were totally stunned. I think looking back at it now, but it was published in 1918, and there are a couple of racy scenes, and there are also women who behave freely in a number of ways. And I think that this might have seemed scandalous to some. I think Catherine herself had a little bit of a she had a mysterious life, and she was very private, and I think that anything anyone would say about her now is pure speculation. But, you know, she did live in the West Village and hung out with all sorts of libertines, and so, you know, maybe there was just speculation that she was up to no good. But the real reason I'm reading it also is that it's really one of my favorite books of well, all time. And Corey and I worked on it together, and I teach in the MFA program at Butler University. And I taught a workshop on YA literature, and I included this because it's part of the kind of the curriculum of so many junior high and high schools. And in some ways, I think that has kind of hurt Catherine's reputation because people remember it as a book for young people, but it really is a masterpiece. I mean, it's hard for me to think of more than 5 books in the 20th century that I know of that I think is good.
And I'll just say I had never read it until you assigned it in class, and I always sort of thought of it as like a Little House on the Prairie kind of a book where it was just teaching you how pioneer people live, and there wasn't really more to it. And then I read the book and loved it. It's a great book.
And I do think that that's another reason that it's on the curriculum, because it is I forget, it was either Edith Wharton or Sarah Orne Jewett who told Cather to stop writing about New York and start writing about Lincoln, Nebraska, because she was getting all the New York stuff wrong, or there was a lot of stories like that. But she was from, I mean, as far as Edith Wharton was concerned, the moon. I mean, Red Wing, Nebraska is where she was from. I think this was the most bizarre place that Wharton had ever heard of. Anyway, so I'm just going to also start from the beginning, because I think that the beginning is really kind of magnificent, and my hope is that, and sometimes when you get a snatch of a book from the middle, it doesn't always encourage you to read the whole thing, but if you read from the beginning, maybe you'll all go home and buy it here. I don't know if you sell these things.
No, but we've probably got a copy you can have. We've got some donated books.
Okay, so just right from the beginning, my Ántonia. Then this is the introduction, but it's an introduction she wrote, not an introduction by the editor. Last summer, I happened to be crossing the plains of Iowa in a season of intense heat. It was my good fortune to have for a traveling companion James Quayle Burden, Jim Burden as we still call him in the West. He and I are old friends. We grew up together in the same Nebraska town, and we had much to say to each other. While the train flashed through never-ending miles of ripe wheat, by country towns and bright flowered pastures and oak groves wilting in the sun, we sat in the observation car where the woodwork was hot to the touch and the red dust lay deep over everything. The dust and heat, the burning wind reminded us of many things. We were talking about what it is like to spend one's childhood in little towns like these, buried in wheat and corn under stimulating extremes of climate, burning summers when the world lies breathability in the sky, when one is fairly stifled in vegetation, in the color and smell of strong weeds and heavy harvests, blustery winters with little snow, when the whole country is stripped bare and green as sheet iron. We agreed that no one who had not grown up in a little prairie town could know anything about it. It was a kind of Freemasonry, we said. Although Jim Burden and I both live in New York and are old friends, I did not see much of him there. He is legal counsel for one of the great Western railways, and is sometimes away from his New York office for weeks together. That is one reason why we do not often meet. On another is that I do not like his wife. When Jim was still an obscure young lawyer struggling to make his way in New York, his career was suddenly advanced by a brilliant marriage. Genevieve Whitney was the only daughter of a distinguished man. Her marriage with young Burden was the subject of sharp comment at the time. It was said that she had been brutally jilted by her cousin, Rutland Whitney, and that she married this unknown man from the West out of bravado. She was a restless, headstrong girl even then, who liked to astonish her friends. Later, when I knew her, she was always doing something unexpected. She gave one of her townhouses for suffrage headquarters, produced one of her own plays at the Princess Theater, was arrested for picketing during a garment maker's strike, etc. I'm never able to believe that she has much feeling for the causes to which she lends her name and her fleeting interest. She's handsome, energetic, executive, but to me she seems unimpressionable and temperamentally incapable of enthusiasm. Her husband's quiet tastes irritate her, I think, and she finds it worthwhile to play the patroness to a group of young poets and painters of advanced ideas and mediocre ability. She has her own fortune and lives her own life. For some reason, she wishes to remain Mrs. James Burton. As for Jim, no disappointments have been severe enough to chill his naturally romantic and ardent disposition. This disposition, though it often made him seem very funny when he was a boy, has been one of the strongest elements in his success. He loves with a personal passion the great country through which his railway runs and branches. His faith in it and his knowledge of it have played an important part in its development. He's always able to raise capital for new enterprises in Wyoming or Montana, and has helped young men out there do remarkable things in mines and timber and oil. If a young man with an idea can once get Jim Burton's attention, can manage to accompany him where he goes off into the wilds hunting for lost parks or exploring new canyons, then the money, which means action, is usually forthcoming. Jim is still able to lose himself in those big Western dreams. Though he is now over 40, he meets new people and new enterprises with the impulsiveness by which his boyhood friends remember him. He never seems to me to grow older. His fresh color and sandy hair and quick changing blue eyes are those of a young man, and his sympathetic, solicitous interest in women is as youthful as it is Western and American. During that burning day when we were crossing Iowa, our talk kept returning to a central figure, a bohemian girl whom we had known long ago and whom both of us admired. Bohemian, by the way, this book actually means someone from Bohemia. More than any other person we remember, this girl seemed to mean to us the country, the conditions, the whole adventure of our childhood. To speak her name was to call up pictures of people and places, to set a quiet drama going in one's brain. I'd lost sight of her altogether, but Jim had found her again after long years, had renewed a friendship that meant a great deal to him, and out of his busy life had set apart time enough to enjoy that friendship. His mind was full of her that day. He made me see her again, feel her presence, revived all my old affection for her. I can't see, he said impetuously, why you've never written anything about Ántonia. It's actually pronounced Ántonia, as she makes a big point of, but it's just so in our culture as Ántonia, I can't bring myself to pronounce it properly. Anyway, I told him I'd always felt that other people, he himself for one, knew her much better than I. I was ready, however, to make an agreement with him. I would set down on paper all that I remembered of Ántonia if he would do the same. We might, in this way, get a picture of her. He rumpled his hair with a quick, excited gesture, which with him often announces a new determination, and I could see that my suggestion took hold of him. Maybe I will, he declared. He stared out the window for a few moments, and then he turned to me again. When he turned to me again, his eyes had the sudden clearness that comes from something the mind itself sees. Of course, he said, I should have to do it in a direct way and say a great deal about myself. It's through myself that I knew and felt her, and I've had no practice in any other form of presentation. I told him that how he knew her and felt her was exactly what I most wanted to know about Ántonia. He had opportunities that I, as a little girl who watched her come and go, had not. Months afterward, Jim Burton arrived at my apartment one stormy winter afternoon with a bulging legal portfolio sheltered under his fur coat. He brought it in to the sitting room with him and tapped it with some pride as he stood warming his hands. I finished it last night, that thing about Ántonia, he said. Now what about yours? I had to confess that mine had not gone beyond a few straggling notes. Notes? I didn't make any. He drank his tea all at once and put down the cup. I didn't arrange or rearrange, I simply wrote down what of herself and myself and other people Antonia's name recalls to me. I suppose it hasn't any form. It hasn't any title either. He went into the next room, sat down at my desk and wrote on the pinkish face of the portfolio the word Ántonia. He frowned at this for a moment, then prefixed another word, making it my Ántonia. That seemed to satisfy me. Read it as soon as you can, he said, rising, but don't let it influence your own story. My own story was never written, but the following narrative of James' manuscript, substantially as he brought it to me. So I just want to read maybe 5 minutes of the commencement of Jim Burke's manuscript.
That's such a good intro. Who does not want to read that story after that?
Yeah, no, it's really gentle, but really sort of...
Well, it adds to the mystery at the end, too, because she's the writer, he's not, and then he writes his half, and she never does hers.
It is,
It's kind of interesting.
yeah. I first heard of Ántonia in what seemed to me an interminable journey across the great Midland Plain of North America. I was 10 years old then. I'd lost both my father and my mother within a year, and my Virginia relatives were sending me out to my grandparents who lived in Nebraska. I traveled in the care of a mountain boy, Jake Marpole, one of the hands on my father's old farm under the Blue Ridge, who was now going west to work for my grandfather. Jake's experience of the world was not much wider than mine. He'd never been in a railway train until the morning when we set out together to try to find our fortunes in a new world. We went all the way in day coaches, becoming more sticky and grimy with each stage of the journey. Jake bought everything the newsboys offered him: candy, oranges, brass collar buttons, a watch charm, and for me, A Life of Jesse James, which I remember as one of the most satisfactory books I ever read. Beyond Chicago, we were under the protection of a friendly passenger conductor who knew all about the country to which we were going and gave us a great deal of advice in exchange for our confidence. He seemed to us an experienced and worldly man who had been almost everywhere. In his conversation, he threw out lightly the names of distant states and cities. He wore the rings and pins and badges of different fraternal orders to which he belonged. Even his cuff buttons were engraved with hieroglyphics, and he was more inscribed than an Egyptian obelisk. Once when he sat down to chat, he told us that in the immigrant car ahead of us there was a family from across the water, whose destination was the same as ours. They can't speak any English except one little girl, and all she has to say is, "We go Black Hawk, Nebraska." She's not much older than you, 12 or 13 maybe, and she's as bright as a new dollar. Don't you want to go ahead and see her, Jimmy? She's got pretty brown eyes, too. This last remark made me bashful, and I shook my head and settled down to Jesse James. Jake nodded at me approvingly and said you were likely to get diseases from foreigners. I do not remember crossing the Missouri River or anything about the long day's journey through Nebraska. Probably by that time I had crossed so many rivers that I was dull to them. The only thing very noticeable about Nebraska was that it was still, all day long, Nebraska. I had been sleeping, curled up in a red plush seat for a long while when we reached Black Hawk. Jake roused me and took me by the hand. We stumbled down from the train to a wooden siding where men were running about with lanterns. I couldn't see any town or even distant lights. We were surrounded by utter darkness. The engine was panting heavily after its long run. In the red glow from the firebox, a group of people stood huddled together on the platform, encumbered by bundles and boxes. I knew that this must be the immigrant family that the conductor had told us about. The woman wore a fringed shawl tied over her head, and she carried a little tin trunk in her arms, hugging it as if it were a baby. There was an old man, tall and stooped, 2 half-grown boys and a girl holding oilcloth bundles, and a little girl clung to her mother's skirts. Presently, a man with a lantern approached them and began to talk, shouting and exclaiming. I picked up my ears, for it was positively the first time I had heard a foreign tongue. Another lantern came along, a bantering voice called out, Hello, are you Mr. Burden's folks? If you are, it's me you're looking for. I'm Otto Fuchs. I'm Mr. Burden's hired man, and I'm to drive you out. Hello, Jimmy. Ain't you scared to come so far west? I looked up with interest at the new face in the lantern light. He might have stepped out of the pages of Jesse James. He wore a sombrero hat with a wide leather band and a bright buckle, and the ends of his mustache were twisted up stiffly like old horns. He looked lively and ferocious, I thought, as if he had history. A long scar ran across one cheek and drew the corner of his mouth up in a sinister curl. The top of his left ear was gone, and his skin was as brown as an Indian's. Surely this was the face of a desperado. As he walked about the platform in his high-heeled boots, looking for our trunks, I saw that he was a rather slight man, quick and wiry and light in his feet. He told us we had a long night drive ahead of us, and had better be on the hike. He led us to a hitching bar where 2 farm wagons were tied, and I saw the Thorne family crowding into one of them. The other was for us. Jake on the front seat with Otto Fuchs, and I rode on the straw on the bottom of a wagon box, covered up by buffalo hide. The immigrants rumbled off in the empty darkness, and we followed them. So maybe I'll leave it there. Perhaps you're sufficiently sleepy now, Corey, that I've done my work.
Yeah, that was great. Now I'm gonna read my name.
Yeah.
You're just wow.
Yeah.